Good afternoon, everyone. It's about that time. It's noon, and that means it's time to get started. I appreciate all of you being here. It looks like we have a couple hundred participants already here, and we're expecting a few more. I really, really appreciate you carving out some time to be with us. My name is Lee Henson, president of AgileDad and founder, and I welcome you to this session. Today's session, we're going to cover something really exciting to me. This is a study about the 7 deadly sins of technical debt. Now, in all transparency, because that's what Agile's about, I had an opportunity to do this presentation at an Agile conference in Washington, D.C. Many years ago, where we talked about this. And the conference title then was The Snow White and Her 7 Deadly Dwarfs. And it talked about the 7 deadly sins of technical debt. I figured that might be a little over the top for this presentation, but sometimes it's better to do that type of presentation or those type of titles in order to gain the attraction that you need. Some people call that clickbait, right? But I wanted to make sure that we could, get it into the session. But this is going to be sort of a duplicate, but we've added some new things to it. So if you had a chance to attend that session way back when, some of this may be a refresher for you. But overall, this is chock full of good information. So I hope you find this valuable. There is an accompanying podcast, also an accompanying comic book. So we'll talk more about that as we go. I wanted to make sure I give you as much information as I can and something to take away as my way of saying thank you for you carving out the time with me, because you are what makes this awesome. Yeah, someone mentioned it's called a hook. So yeah, that's exactly what it is. So without any further ado, let's get started. Kind of like a daily stand-up, right? So this is me. In case you've never met me before, I asked my admin to use my new headshot. She apparently thought headshot meant from the waist up. So I had to depart ways with her. That's not why we parted ways. She got a full-time gig. But if you have anybody that's interested in being an admin, I'm still looking for one that's going to be, very agile and someone that can help me really get some things rocking and rolling. So if you know somebody, hey, that's an open position. So I'd love to see some resumes for that. With that being said, we've been doing this for a long time. We provide both certification training and non-certification training. We have a bunch of coaches that work for us. We service 43 of the Fortune 100 companies here in the United States. So we stay pretty busy. But my goal is to put the human side in everything we do. I want to really humanize work. I want people to love what they do. I don't want you to just feel like you're going to work for the drudgery. I remember a long time ago, I had the chance to interview someone and I said, "Why do you do what you do?" And her answer was, "Because it's what I get paid to do." And it rubbed me the wrong way so bad, because I want you to really enjoy what you're doing. But what I find is that people struggle with this topic. So just a reminder for everyone on the call, we do have other free sessions, including one tomorrow. It's the 9 ways to motivate powerful agile teams. It's going to be a great session. In addition, we have some virtual courses that are coming up. I put those there. So that's an entire list. If you find that any of these appeal to you, you can visit agiledad.com and we'll be happy to set you up and even get you a little discount for coming here. So we can make sure we get you a little bit off. So if you're interested in that, just hit me up either through email or through the chat window or through the Q&A at the end, and I'll be happy to get you that information. So the topics we're going to cover today, that was a quick intro. Topics we're going to cover today. Here are the 7 deadly sins: unintended features, poorly designed architecture, lack of product backlog management, outdated defects and bugs, lack of automated testing, and we'll talk more about that when we get there, lack of coding and testing standards, and a lack of refactoring. And I give it a name. I call it Felipe. So I apologize if there are any Felipes on the call. It was just a random name that we chose, and I think when we get there, you'll understand why. So the goal here isn't just to identify the debt, but we're going to have strong conversations about how to address it, how to eliminate it, what kind of things you should be looking for, what kind of tools you have that you can use at your disposal that are free or nearly free that'll help you solve some of these problems. So the first topic, without any further ado, before I do that, let's talk about where this comes from. So this one, or this topic, it shouldn't say Scrum Guide, That's interesting. Well, it was in a Scrum Guide as well, but Agile Alliance put out an introduction to technical debt concept, and this was a document that they put out. But it is mentioned in the Scrum Guide, and I guess that's why I left it here, because the definition. So this definition of technical debt, many people call it design debt or code debt. Basically, it's related to any endeavor that you're doing. It's a concept in software development that reflects the implied cost of additional rework caused by choosing an easy or limited solution now, instead of using a better approach that would take longer. So some people might call it robbing Peter to pay Paul, or some people might call it, the short answer now for the long answer later. It's a trade-off, right? So we want to figure out, is this intentional debt or unintentional debt? So with that, I want to give you an example. Intentional debt is knowingly doing this, right? It's knowingly saying, I'm going to do this, knowing that there's going to be negative ramifications. Unintentional would be if something changed under the hood. So for example, there was a change to Microsoft Azure and it broke a lot of the systems that you built for whatever reason. That's something that's outside of your control, but still debt that you need to fix, right? So we're going to talk about approaching this from both ways conceptually. We're also going to talk about many organizations who aren't doing technical projects. They're doing different types of projects. We're going to talk about how to address this if you're not in a technology-based company. So we're going to make sure we hit both of those. But the first one we want to talk about is Unintended Features. And there you get a preview of the comic from the comic strip. I love this comic. It's pretty funny. It cleans your house. It fights crime. It searches for buried treasure. It helps you find true love. And somebody here says, weren't we supposed to be making a new kind of toaster? And then this person says, is it supposed to have an arm sticking out of its head? It's just, we get to the point sometimes where what we build just becomes so interesting and so over bloated. So I remember, I share this story in my Scrum classes a lot, where I talk about, a lot of times I find product owners. Now, there's a difference. So I want to be clear here. I've been in a situation where I've had a product owner who is very specific about what they wanted. They were super specific to the point where they wrote a long-winded, for those of you who love acronyms, they wrote a long-winded, several hundred-page technical user requirements document. It was the perfect turd. It didn't stink too much. It had a lot of documentation in it. It had every I dotted, every T crossed. It was just a great document that people could read through and learn about, different things that were happening. But this document, so I want to apply it to a real world situation. This document happened to be the document that was required to build the F-35 fighter jet. Now, let me tell you, it was in detail. It was well written. It was well vetted. It had a lot of information. The problem is, doing a lot of work up at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, what we discovered is that the pilots, the fighters, they would rather fly anything other than the F-35. And we were like, why? And their answer was because the software is completely out of date. While the machine itself was, a far superior machine, the software was so out of date. And when I asked why was the software out of date, the answer was because we followed the spec. Instead of building the features that we should have built, or instead of updating the software and modernizing it to be what it was supposed to be today, so that it would be a practical application of those features, what ended up happening was they stuck to whatever the spec said, which was written several years prior to the jet actually being in production. Kind of one of these things where you wrote all these things and said, this is what I want. But then by the time the product was released, it wasn't what you needed. So the question becomes, how do we get the balance in the features so that we're not building things, unintentionally that we don't need, but how do we get the balance between that and the focus on building things in such a way that we're keeping up with the times, that we're modifying what we need to? And I think when I think of unintended features, I often think of the opposite. So I think of, the team that, I tell a team, okay, I'm the product owner. I need you to build me a vehicle that's going to give me safe, reliable transportation to and from one place, and I give them all the specs and I say, I want you to build me a Fiat. Why a Fiat? I don't know. I just randomly picked it. I want you to build me a Fiat or a Subaru. Take your choice, right? I just want something that's simple and reliable. The team comes back and it's demo day and they're feeling kind of proud. And I walk in and I've got the cloth over the car and I'm like, oh, good, they finished. And, you can see them kind of snickering in a corner, and we pull off the sheet and there it is, a Ferrari. It's bright red. It's gorgeous. It's a Ferrari. But what they don't realize is that now we have to maintain that Ferrari. And maintenance on a Ferrari, I can tell you right now, just the price of the oil change alone is enough to scare most people away, right? So if anybody on the call drives a Ferrari, you can chime in on this. But the truth is, in order to do an oil change on a Ferrari, they have to drop several pieces from below. So the minimum price for an oil change that I could find was $1,500. That's $1,500 for an oil change. And that was the least I could find. So with that being said, that quickly reminded me of why I or no one else should ever own a Ferrari unless you're independently wealthy. The price for that oil change on the Fiat or the Subaru would have been, the same oil change would have been $14.99 with a coupon from Walmart. Where am I going with this? Sometimes it's better for us to look past and say, these are great features. These are things that are going to be incredible. But instead of just getting a list of features, and I guess this is the easiest way to describe it. Many people say, I need these 15, 10 commandments. And we're like, approved, right? And then what happens? We go to build those things and we realize that they're a lot harder than we thought they were. They're a lot deeper dive, and it's going to require a lot more thought process and a lot more brain power and a lot more build power to build these things. So what ends up happening? We end up not meeting expectations. We only build like 5 of the 10, but the 5 that we build are prolific. I want to be clear. So maybe the 5 is, solve world hunger. I don't know, a cure for cancer, create world peace, a cure for COVID-19. That would be good. Maybe even destroy the Republican and Democrat Party and create a third party called the Common Sense Party that puts an electable candidate in the presidency. Those 5 things would be amazing, right? But the truth is, even if we built those 5 things, if we had promised 10, the question that's going to come back to us as a team is, where are the other 5? Where are the other 5 things that you didn't deliver, right? So now we have to face ourselves and say, wow, that was silly. So my challenge to you regarding unintended features is to approach this a different way. Here's my plan. What I want you to do is, instead of saying, I need the following 10 features, or I need $1 million. And for what? To build these 10 features. I don't want you to do that. Instead, what I want you to get used to, and this is what's amazing. I've done a lot of government contracts and this works really well. We'll win the contract and then we'll look through all the list of the requirements. And then I'll go to the people who are in charge of the contract and I'll say, okay, now that we've got that aside, tell me what you really need. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, really. I'm like, I want to know something different. I don't want to know what the document said. I mean, that's going to be helpful later, but I want to know, what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to make better? Who are you trying to make more happy? Who is your target customer and what problem are they having? What issue are we trying to tackle, right? I specifically remember working with one of the large entertainment clients that happens to have places of operation in Florida and California and other places, but you can figure out who it is probably. And while we were working with them, one of the problems that they had, I'll never forget this. It was, I said, so what are you trying to do? What are you trying to build? And they said, we want to build an interactive queue that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, upwards of $1 million. It was upwards of $1 million. And they said, we want to build this completely interactive queue. So that way, when people are waiting in line for this attraction, they'll have all this entertainment and things for them to do, especially young children. We want to make sure everybody's taken care of. And I mean, they had this multi-million-dollar plan and this large document of how it was going to lay out with mock-ups and this and that. And I stopped for a minute and I said, is that the problem you're trying to solve? And they thought about it for a minute. I said, I think the problem you're trying to solve is the queue, not the lack of the entertainment, but how do you solve the problem of the queue? And in this case, it was just as easy as getting those little buzzers from a restaurant, so that if you walked up and the queue was between 0 and an hour, that you would get a little buzzer and you would be put into a queue. And while you had the buzzer, you could walk around. They had a little like kids playnasium inside that you could go and play on and do things. And it was just a really fun, entertaining place. Parents could sit down, you could go shopping, you could do whatever you wanted to do, as long as you stay within a certain radius of this attraction. And then when it was your time, your little buzzer would go off, you would go up, and you'd be put in a line that was no longer than 15 to 20 minutes. I thought that was pretty good. It solved the queue problem, and it saved them over $1 million because they didn't have to worry about what they were going to do with all these people. And they actually made money because people would go shop and buy refreshments and do things. I think the key here when it comes to unintended features is, instead of us constantly focusing on the bigger, bolder, better solution, we need to simplify down and talk about, who is our target audience and do we know them? What problem are we trying to solve? Or what solution are we trying to make better? What are we trying to enhance? What are we trying to improve? And I think that if we look at the features that way, it's going to help us isolate and be able to create a better balance between, are we building the right thing? Are we building the thing right? And are we getting it out there fast enough? Because I'll tell you, that multi-million-dollar system would have been incredible, right? I just don't know that anybody would have used it. I don't know that it would have been appreciated. I think that the right approach was solving a core problem instead of constantly looking for things to expand and build upon, right? So I think the key here is to focus on an MVP, a minimal viable product that solves the problem, and it gets us going in the right direction. So the point here, in summary, unintended features. Make sure we focus on building as little as possible. And I said this in one of my other sessions, I'm going to repeat it. We should be focused on outcome and not output. We should be focused on making people happy. We should be focused on what can we do to achieve the best outcome, happy customers, and do we understand who they are with as little output as possible. It doesn't require a ton of output in order to do that. We just need to make sure we understand who these people are and that we're servicing them. And that's the most important thing. And I think you'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised. If you can focus on outcome over output, you can generally solve this issue. And it just makes things run so much smoother. So that's unintended features. Interesting. There's a lot of meat there, and we're going to talk about how to apply these things at the very end. So I wanted to give you that preview. We're not going to talk about on each one. We're going to talk about a summary of how you can take all 7 of these and apply what you've learned at the very end. So the second is poorly designed architecture. Now, in my mind, there's 2 different types of architecture that exist. Oh, before I do it, I love this cartoon. It says, I knew we should have started with the doors. Like that would have solved the problem. But it's poorly designed architecture, right? I think that there's 2 different types of architecture that I encounter. The first one is called Scarecrow architecture, and the second is steel thread architecture. So when I talk about Scarecrow architecture, I'm giving a little throwback to the Wizard of Oz and the Scarecrow from the character from the series, from the movie, from the presentation. And if you remember the Scarecrow, there were 3 things that he was known for. The first thing he was known for, he had no brain. He was completely brainless. He would often make silly decisions or silly choices. He needed to rely on his friends for guidance. He just didn't have it all together, right? And I think that sometimes when we make our architecture, we don't plan for infrastructure, for future solutions, for potential things that we're going to need to address later. So we end up creating this architecture that is just kind of out there. It doesn't account for anything, and it might solve the problem today, but it doesn't focus on any long-term engagement on how to solve the problem. The second is every time he danced or moved, he'd constantly lose straw, right? So it was one of these things where every time you use it, you'd find these gaps. I remember a lot of people were finding, whether it's technical gaps or whether it's gaps in the API or whether it's memory leaks. That was a big one for a time. It's just there are always these little things that you find which don't seem bad on the surface, but over time they get worse and worse and worse because just like any other debt, you pay interest on this debt. So this debt doesn't go away. In fact, you're going to wind up paying huge amounts of interest on this debt. So every time you're losing something, every time something falls out, every time something breaks, it doesn't just require you to fix that piece, but it requires you to fix all the other pieces that are damaged as a result of losing that piece. And it forces you to think more big picture. And third, this is probably the most sad, he was flammable. And the witch loved that he was flammable because he would burn so easy. It's one of these things where if all we're doing is just putting things in as needed, if we become the drive-through window of architecture, right? Welcome to architecture. Can I take your order, please? It's going to wind up being a bad thing. So we want to make sure that we can focus on how to build sound architecture that makes sense, that people can embrace and hold on to, and that it's something that we can, build going forward with confidence. And I think that, speaking of confidence and build confidence, it sort of leads me into the second type of architecture, which is steel thread architecture. Now, steel thread architecture, this goes back, we're going back some time here. We're going back a ways, right? So for those of you who are as old as I am, we're going back a minute, right? And we're going to talk about pre-laser and GPS measurement when people were building the Golden Gate Bridge. We're talking that long ago, that the way that they would measure the span is by extending a steel thread all the way across, so that they could get a great measurement of what they were trying to see and how that would equate across, right? So, and then from there, they would know the span and they could, start designing the infrastructure and the support structure for that bridge to support a span of that size, right? Because then it would give them the ability to calculate other calculations and figure things out. I think that today, even with laser-based or GPS measurement, however they're doing it today, with satellite coordination and with the monitors. I see the people all the time out there with the poles with the little lens that shoots across. What do they call that? Surveying. So I see the surveying that happens. It's an opportunity for us to survey our architecture. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is the architecture should be built in such a way that it's emergent. Now, for those of you who aren't working in technology, that might not make sense, but you want to build architecture in such a way that you can grow on it. The easiest way for me to do this is to say it should be Lego, but it shouldn't be unstable Lego. It should be stable Lego, right? A lot of people, when they're building large projects, They don't start with that solid platform on the bottom, or they don't start with a good solid infrastructure. And if you're building a Millennium Falcon out of Lego and you're not starting with a solid infrastructure, that thing's going to fall apart so fast, right? I think that what we need to do is focus on two different dimensions of architecture. One is from an organizational perspective, where we can ask ourselves, hey, as an organization, is this architecture going to help us or be expandable for us going into the near foreseeable future? Is it going to help us that we can grow and we can build on this architecture for time to come? Or are we just building architecture to satisfy the needs of our product or service today? And I think that once you get through that and you figure out, hey, I want to build something long term, you're going to start approaching the internal architecture of the products and services that you build differently. I think this begs the question of DevOps and how you get your products and services to market, and whether you're doing continuous deployment or continuous integration, and what type of things you're going to need to support going forward based on the product or service you deliver. So I think it's just so important for you to really get your head around, what that architecture needs to be at an enterprise level, but then also I'm going to take it down one step. What does the architecture need to support at a product level? Are we doing, solid story mapping so we understand the needs of the consumer today, but also the needs of the consumer for time to come? Are we looking at them and saying, okay, today these are the needs, but we hope that in the future it will allow the consumer to do C, D, E, F, and G? And if so, are we being thoughtful about the way we're building the actual product so that it has that opportunity to expand and do those things? Are we making decisions today to take shortcuts so that we can just get the minimal piece out there, knowing that later we're going to end up having to pay for this if we ever have to expand? And I think that sometimes, time to market is important. Speed is important. And sometimes it's important for us to put down the law and say, yeah, this is the direction we're going to go. But I think all too often we don't take this into consideration, or we shouldn't take this into consideration. We should look at the long-term appeal. And from a product owner perspective, look at this and say, hey, where is this product trying to go? What are we trying to do with it? What is the life cycle of this product? Is it something that we're sunsetting, sunrising? Is it something that's going to be around for a really long time? And once we know that, it's going to help us better architect and figure out how the product or service should be built. So I think that, we almost need to take that same steel thread approach through using story mapping or other techniques to figure out how to create a lean model canvas, or whatever we're going to use, a business model canvas, to discuss how that product is going to be implemented and what long-term do we hope it'll do, what problems it's trying to solve. And I think that if we look at it that way, it's going to help us solve both of the first two. So this ties back to the unintended features as well, because once we know that, it's going to help us align that product in such a way that we have laser focus on what we need to do, that we know our GPS coordinates, we're all heading in the right direction, and we're not just haphazardly building things to satisfy the need of the moment. I think if we get away from satisfying the need of the moment, that's going to really help us zoom in and do the right thing, right? And that's what it's all about. The third topic is lack of product backlog management and inappropriate visibility. So this is our product owner here on the left. He says, okay, add another one. And he's got all these spinning plates. And I love the quote here. It says, we pride ourselves on how many plates our product owners can spin. This is one of those things where you got the company who says, we are going to find, and I hear this all the time. So I'm just going to use this as my example. We're going to spend as much money as we need to until we discover the next iPhone. We're going to take all the projects and throw them at the wall like a plate of spaghetti and see what sticks, right? So they launch all these things, all at the same time. So what ends up happening? We end up having to shrink team size to cover all these things that are in motion. So if you could picture a 5-year timeline, right? Picture a timeline. And on day one, we start all 5 major projects. Now I'm using 5 as my number. That number could be scaled to 50, 500, 5,000, however you want. But you're starting all 5 projects, major projects. I was a graduate of Tulane University down in New Orleans, so I'm using simplicity here. So 5 major projects. We got 5 years to do them in. So what do we do on day one? We all sit in a room as product owners and say, which one's the most important? And the answer is they all are. So what do? We get all 5 plates spinning, just like this guy in the picture. We get them all going, and we got to maintain and get all those plates spinning. We break our team sizes down into very small teams. We end up creating I-shaped individuals who are only laser focused on one thing. And what happens? These individuals, we go up to someone and we say, okay, we need you to spend 30% of your time on this project, 48% of your time on this project, 61% of your time on that project, 28% of your time on that one, and 71% of your time on this one, whatever the number might be. However you add it together, it equals 100% of your time, right? No, not exactly. They always over allocate their best people or their best teams. They pile it on those teams because they want them to get it done. So what happens? Parkinson's Law kicks in. If anyone knows what Parkinson's Law is, I'll be very proud of you. Parkinson's Law says that work will expand to fill the allocated amount of time. So when you pile all this work on the teams, the first thing they're going to say is, well, we have 5 years to deliver all this stuff. So what they'll do is they'll expand the work so it fits inside of this 5-year window, but you wait the entire 5 years to get anything of value delivered. So at the end, you deliver projects 1 through 5. You got about 20% consumer satisfaction. You got to think about it. What is Sheila going to say? Sheila's going to say, oh, that's exactly what I asked you 4 or 5 years ago. I'm so glad you built that. I'm going to use those features every day. No, that's not what she's going to say. She's going to say, I asked you for that 5 years ago. Probably 10 to 20% of this is still relevant. The rest is completely irrelevant. Why would I need this today? It's the same as the story about the F-35 fighter jet, right? We need to make sure that we're building things that are relevant, that make sense, that the consumer actually wants or needs. And I think that waiting 5 years to get something, wow, that just, it'll kill you. It hurts my heart to even say it, because not only is it built haphazardly, poor architecture, infrastructure, but it's not the features that the people are asking for, unintended features. So do you see what's happening? The debt kind of compacts. I shouldn't say compacts, it builds, right? It just builds on one another. And you end up with this giant debt ball. And it's just terrible when it happens. But it compounds. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. So the debt compounds. So what ends up happening is you get this product owner or this organization that wants to spin up every one of their ideas. If you can change one thing in your organization, and you had the magic lamp that you could rub and just change one thing without getting fired, my number one recommendation would be find a way to help your organization limit work in progress. Not at a team level, but limit it at a project level. Instead of trying to do 5 things at once, why don't we get each product owner to select 1 or 2 things that they want to work on and get those mapped out in a roadmap? What ends up happening is by limiting your work in progress, you end up building the right products or services in the right amount of time. You don't find that you're struggling to figure out what to do next or how to do it. Another big benefit is now I can get teams to swarm to a limited amount of work in progress. So instead of having 1 team or 2 teams working on something, now in no way am I saying that every team works equally efficient. You're going to have 1 team that's an expert in something and 1 team that's just contributing and getting some work done. But what's going to happen is, as you move from product to project, you're going to see that knowledge base shift. So you see in one project, you have team A who's the expert. In the next project, it might be team B. But the point is, as long as they're contributing and adding value and not stepping on each other's toes, it's good to get more teams to swarm to limited work in progress. So we want to allow teams to swarm. We want to allow them to organizations should minimize the number of projects in flight. And then teams should also have their own team WIP limits so that they're not taking on too much work. So we have ample time within a sprint to both develop the work, test the work, make sure that we get it all ready so that we can get it out to our customers faster. So the 3 big takeaways here are, if you find ways to limit work in progress by not spinning up all these plates at once, the first benefit is you're going to have higher consumer satisfaction, because instead of waiting 5 years for something, you might be able to deliver the first one in 1.25 years and the second one in 2.5 years. The point is you'll be able to deliver more frequently, gather that feedback, and deliver things the consumer will actually use. And that also reveals higher consumer satisfaction, right? So you're going to have happier customers. That's the big one. 2, it's going to give you the ability to really generate revenue faster, because if you're getting those products or services to market faster, you're going to be able to sell those products or services, and you're going to be able to yield greater revenue. So instead of having to wait 5 years to figure out whether something's the right solution or not, every year or so, you're getting a new valuable product or service that you can then promote or put out there so that you can see what your consumers' reactions are, make fine-tuning adjustments, and make sure you're keeping a consumer happy. So you got increased revenue. And then I think the big one is this, and this is the one that kills me. I've worked with so many organizations and I hear this happen and it just blows my mind. Let's just hypothetically say that your group has been awarded $10 million to build a specific project. And I'm just throwing out the random number 10 million. With that project, it's a 5-year deal. So you work on it for 2.5 years. You get halfway through. And at that point, you discover this is a bad idea. It's just not going to work. It's not going to solve the problem. You didn't realize it sooner. You just figured it out. So what do? Most organizations end up saying, we got to keep going. We're this much invested in it. Well, at least try to figure out something they can use. And they'll spend the remainder of that 5 years building out this product or service, knowing that it's a loser. No one's ever going to use it. But I think the big thing here, the most interesting thing, is that they should raise awareness right away, but they're fearful because they know if they raise awareness right away and say, hey, we just sunk $5 million cost in this project that'll never work. The answer there is you're fired, right? You just wasted $5 million of my money. So it's one of these things where they can decide, do I want to be fired today or do I want to be fired later, and have a 2.5-year window to update my resume on LinkedIn and, put my searchindeed.com and put myself out there to see if I can find a new job. And, I'm saying that kind of whole, with in jest, but I want to make sure that you understand that if you don't manage the backlog properly, all these side effects happen. You're making promises that no one can keep. You're promising the organization things that'll never be done. You're working on projects that may or may not even be needed. You might not have even needed project number 3 and number 4, but you didn't find out until you're halfway through, where if you would have just dedicated your attention to a single project at a time or to a couple at a time, you might have discovered along the way that you didn't need 3 or 4 and eliminated that waste. So as part of being lean and as part of building the right thing, I think it's important that the product owner maintain 2 backlogs. They have something called a product owner backlog, which is a collection of every whim, idea, wish, desire. It's a collection of all the things that could possibly happen for this product. And if you picture it or visualize it as an Excel worksheet, at the bottom it has multiple tabs, and you might have one tab for each product or for each project that particular product owner is responsible for. That way, instead of having everything in flight at once and having all these ideas just in a polluted, convoluted backlog, they have a single point of reference that they can go to, enter these ideas, and then promote those ideas to a true product backlog. Now, the true product backlog should be everything that we're working on now and maybe a few sprints out or one release out. So that way the team can still get their head around what's coming in the future. And that way we can plan and forecast and size things appropriately. But we want this to be something that's maintained in such a way that it's clear, that it's easily understood, that people can, get their head around it, and that the appropriate visibility is there. Now, this is where it gets interesting. A lot of times we'll let leadership or sales or other people have visibility in this backlog. And a natural reoccurring result is that, they'll make promises. They'll say, oh, we can get that product to, based on the team's current velocity, you should have that feature in spring of 2024. How many units can I sell you today? People are trying to forecast out for way longer, and trying to make promises that are things that we know we couldn't keep. So I think the key here in summary, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is that the backlog should be maintained at multiple levels, that we should have a level that belongs exclusively to the product owner, that they can choose who they want to see it, that contains longevity, the long-term future, as far out as you want to go for all the features, wishes, whims, and desires of that product or service. But you also should maintain a true product backlog, which is all the things you're working on today and maybe a forecast for the things to come, whether it be in the next release or the next few sprints. And you want to make sure that that one is highly visible. But the key here to make this all work is to limit work in progress. We want to limit the WIP. We don't want to have, all these different things in motion at the same time. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear. In no way am I saying that your company should be working on one item at a time. That would be devastating. We want to make sure that you are working on things that make sense, but not necessarily one project. If you're a large company, there's no way we're going to tell a large company you can only have one product in flight at a time. That's not going to work. But what we are going to say is, instead of having 100 things in flight, what if we had 20 things in flight, delivered them faster, made revenue, got feedback from our consumers, and had the opportunity to inspect and adapt? It would give us just a much more crisp view into where we're going, and it would allow us to really get our head around and understand, so that we're not constantly playing the plate spinning game. It's kind of ironic, but someone threw the first question out into the Q&A. They asked about a defect backlog. It's funny you should ask, because the next topic we're going to talk about is outdated defects and bugs and what to do with them. So for me, this blows my mind. There are companies that handle defects a lot differently. Oh, I didn't go over the cartoon. Let's do that real quick. So the three spiders are walking, and you can see the front one there. He's got the little beard, the goatee, and he's got his little walker, his little cane there. And the guy's like, whoa, man, that's old man Jenkins. He's the first bug in the system, man. They say he's been around here for like 20 years or so. And the other guy's like, whoa, right? You know, it's funny when you bring it up that way, but yeah, it's just, I went to an organization, and I swear I'm not pulling your leg. I went to an organization, and this blew my mind. They prided themselves on keeping track of all their defects. They said, we address every defect that comes in. You know, we keep track of all of them. In fact, we have a defect backlog. There you go. And in that backlog, it contains 12,411 defects that are outstanding since the creation of the product. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. And I said, I can't believe you keep track of all those things. So do you still actually fix? They go, oh yes. They said, it's a requirement to our customers, you know, with confidence that we fix each and every one of these things. I'm like, that's so interesting. I said, do you mind if I pull a couple up just to kind of get an idea, you know, some of the older ones that are in there? They're like, no, go ahead. So I literally wrote a SQL query, you know, select top 5-star, you know, organize by date via oldest, you know, sort by, group by, order by, you know, pull them up, bam. And I get the first bug, and I pull it out and I open it up, and I swear I'm not kidding. The first defect was page does not display correctly in Netscape Navigator. Who's going to fix that? Who's got an AOL disk laying around that we can borrow so we can go and install, hopefully install, probably can't, Netscape Navigator to solve the problem? That is ridiculous. I mean, that's extreme, but that is ridiculous, right? Why would someone even still have that around? It's not even something we should think about at this point, right? So that begs the question, how old should the oldest bug be? How old should the oldest defect be? And how do real world companies handle this, right? So for me, if you had an AgileDad coach in your organization, the first thing we advise you is that the oldest defect that you should have in your queue should either be something that you're addressing in the current sprint or something that you have set up to address in the next sprint. If it's not in the current sprint and it's not in the next sprint, that usually means one of the following is true. One, it wasn't that important. There, I said it. Two, the customer found a suitable workaround. Three, we inadvertently fixed it when we were trying to fix something else. Four, it wasn't actually a defect at all. It was a request for enhancement disguised as a defect so that we try to fix it. Five, the point is, it doesn't matter which of these is the case. It's just we need to look at bugs differently. We need to look at defects differently. Now, many organizations that I go to, the first thing they say is exactly what the question was that came through Q&A. They say, we set up a defect backlog, and what we do is we take 2 developers per sprint, and we allocate 20% of their time to go towards the defect backlog and 80% of their time to go towards the regular work. So now they have people bouncing all over the place. I mean, I'm sure that developer sitting there with their stopwatch going, okay, 20% of my time. Okay, got it. You know, they do the math at 5.896 hours per day, 20% of that, da, 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 da. And every day they allocate exactly 20% of their time. When that buzzer hits, they go back to working on it. You and I both know that never happens. That never happens. When you get somebody who's extremely bright like a developer, somebody who's extremely intelligent like a tester, and you put them in an environment where you say, I need you to work on A and B, they're going to work on A until it's done, then they're going to work on B. And it's just the way they're wired. It's nothing against them. It's just when they start working on something, they don't want to stop and say, oh, you know what? My 20% is done for today. I'm going to have to go. And plus they dread it. They're like, oh crap, I got to work on that stuff for 20 minutes. Oh, right. It's like you're sucking away their will to live as they're at work. I mean, it's just horrible. So for me, one of the things that I strongly promote, and this was something I was going to say for the end, so I'm giving you a little Easter egg here. One of the things that I strongly promote is that organizations create something called a technical debt sprint, where they dedicate a full 2 weeks per quarter to start. And they say once per quarter, we're going to give 2 weeks to address the top 10 debt issues. And they could cover any of these 7 things we're about to discuss today. This is the big one, right? But it can cover any of the 7. And I want you to just identify 10. Why 10? Because it's doable, it's possible. And the team's going to try to fix as many of those 10 things as they can. An organization is going to work on as many of those 10 things as they can. And what they get done is what's completed. What they don't get done, we still have an opportunity to say, okay, if it wasn't done, do we still want to queue this up for something that we work on later? Or is this something that we can put in a very special category? I have a category that I teach all my organizations. It's called known but not resolved, KBNR. And what I often do is I'll take all that remaining debt and I'll archive it. I don't delete it, I archive it. And I label it KBNR, known but not resolved. And then what happens is squeaky wheel gets to grease from that point. So if someone comes up and says, hey, I've got a question. I'm like, yeah, go ahead, fire away. What's your question? They can ask that question and I'll be like, you know what? That is something that we meant to address. Good thing you're on our VIP customer service program. So if you could refresh my memory about that debt, what was the problem you're having again? And what I can do is I can unarchive the old report. I can create a new defect and I can queue it up in the next sprint. That way, if it's something that really needs to be addressed, if it's something that's still a major issue, we know it and we can address it. But if not, this is the beauty. If that doesn't happen, guess what happens? All the weight of that technical debt gets lifted off of the shoulders of the team. And I tell the team, you no longer have to worry about that. What I want you to worry about is what's happening today, right now. And boy, let me tell you, wow, my heart explodes when I say that, because it's just one of those things where I want the team to be able to focus on the needs of today. I want the team to be able to focus on what's happening now. The easiest way for me to describe this is, I'm going to throw some love out to Amazon. We do some coaching there, and I'm going to give you an example of what they do. So when a defect or a bug comes in, there's 3 different classifications or types of defect, if you will. So we call them categories. There's category 1, category 2, and category 3. And just like a hurricane, the higher the category, the worse it is. So let's talk about category 1 for a second. If someone comes in and says, Susie in Bozeman, Montana is unable to complete a $10 Diners Club transaction, chances are, and that's very specific, but chances are Amazon's going to be like, you know what? It'd be cheaper to send her a $20 gift card than to try to figure out how to solve that problem. Send her the gift card. And if she sends you a YouTube video of her shredding the Diners Club card, make it 40. So if anybody's on the Diners Club, anybody on the calls from Diners Club, I apologize. But the point is, sometimes it's better for us to address, the core issue than it is to research that. I mean, yes, that's something that's happening, but what percentage of our customers are suffering from that issue, right? And I think that's what we need to look at. How impactful is this on a risk scale? If I look at it on a risk scale, is this severely impactful or is it very mildly impactful? And what is the cost behind it? Is it something that's costing us a lot of money or a little bit of money, right? And that's the best way to handle it. I'm going to skip category 2 for a second and jump straight up to category 3. Category 3 for Amazon would be, today is Amazon Prime Day, and we are unable to accept credit card payments online, yo. Okay, if that's the case, I don't care who you got to stop. We got to fix the problem, right? That's an all hands on deck solution issue. That's something that you've got to address right there on the spot. But category 2 is where a lot of these fall. 23% of our customers who check out with more than $149 in their cart that have this item and pay with a Visa card experience a 7-second additional delay at checkout. Okay, I don't know if the problem is with the item or if the problem's with the card, or if the problem's with the card, or if the problem's with, it could be any number of things that could be causing that problem. Is it something that warrants, looking into? Probably, right? It's probably something we should look into, but it's not necessarily something that stop all hands on deck. And it's not something that just send a gift card and call it good. It's those things that need to be addressed. And the question then becomes, how do we address those types of things? And my answer is, if it's something that's important enough to interrupt the team in a sprint and it's all hands on deck, do it. Those are few and far between. They're rare. Take care of it. But the majority of the It appears there may have been an interruption in service there. I apologize for that. If everyone's still here, I appreciate it. And I see that, yeah, we had the, yeah, here we go. Excellent. So we had a little freeze there. I apologize, but we should all be good to go now. So I apologize for that freeze. Apparently there was a Zoom issue here. So Zoom tried to get me to do an update. It's kind of funny. Right when I was talking about an outdated defect, right when I was talking about this is incredible. I couldn't have timed this any better. So here's what I got. So, it's amazing to me that this just happened. Instead of, we were talking about Microsoft with a Windows update, but in this case, it was Zoom with a Zoom update. They said, hey, we have a Zoom update that, we want you to take right now, right? We have a Zoom update that we want you to take right now. Are you ready to do this, right? And somebody just commented in the chat, they said Zoom's having some serious QA issues. I believe it, but it's funny because maybe they can benefit. I hope someone from Zoom's on this call because this would be something they could hugely benefit from, right? Instead of trying to push updates to someone, it's a defect, absolutely. But instead of pushing updates to someone at times when they absolutely don't want one, I mean, literally, the delay that I just now received was about me installing Zoom 5.0 and whether or not I wanted to take care of that right now. And my answer was no, obviously I don't want to take care of that right now. I'm in the middle of a webinar. But what perfect timing. Do it now, right? Wow. It's just, those are the kind of things that really blow my mind. How can companies be so persistent with, trying to fix a defect to the point where they say, hey, we don't care what you're going through right now. You need to fix it right now. I'm going to use Apple as my antithesis of this. With Apple, they say, hey, when you have a chance, we got a little update for you, but no rush, just whenever you got time. And it's one of those things where it's great because you can choose when you want to install an Apple update versus when, I know you have some ability to do that with Microsoft as well, but it's not forced upon you, which I think is brilliant. So for me, the key here is when I'm talking about outdated defects and bugs, and wow, I couldn't have timed that any better. I promise that wasn't planned. I promise I didn't just randomly drop from the call. But the defect is something that needs to be addressed right away. But yes, it doesn't require you to force me to do something right now. So the truth is, in many cases, the defect doesn't matter in a grand scheme of things. In other cases, it does. And we need to be able to mount that and figure out, where we are, where the defect stands, and whether or not it really makes a difference, right? So the next one, we'll jump from there because I think we've satisfied that. We've even had a real world example happen during a call. I think that's outstanding. I couldn't have planned that any better. So I guess I ought to summarize real quick first. So summary, do a technical debt sprint, eliminate your top 10 items, do one once a quarter. And then when you get to the point where those defects diminish and where the debt diminishes, you can do them once a year, or as needed. But don't be afraid to present the concept of having a technical debt sprint to your product owners and to your organization so that you can tackle the top 10 issues and then take the rest and archive them. So that way the team can have a clean slate, a fresh way of doing things. So that way they can continue to press forward and do the right thing. Next one, we have lack of automated testing. Oh boy, here we go. So this is a fun topic. This is one of my favorite topics. So the lack of test automation, if I'm talking about this at a unit test level, first of all, the cartoon, got to share that with you. So it says here, the test is almost done. Keep cranking the wheel, Steve, and he's just sitting there turning the wheel. It's just amazing to me how many things we try to do manually, right? But that automated testing is so important. And I think that if you're talking about it at the unit test level, it's kind of obvious that we should automate as much as we can from a unit test perspective. But when it comes to the regression testing, what percentage or what part needs to be automated? And a lot of people say, well, for the product or service that I'm building, automation isn't even an option, right? They say, what can we do instead? So my answer is, if you're not doing test automation or if you're not building software, the answer might be test optimization, choosing which tests to run once versus run often. Is it something that you only need to check one time to make sure that something is built a certain way or done a certain way? Or is it something that is going to be persistent that you're going to need to check over and over again? And I think that once you understand that, it will help you identify which regression suites or regression tests need to be run persistently. And those are the ones that you should be, building those those automated test cases for. So I want to make sure that you stay focused and that you understand, the concept behind the testing. So whether it's testing suites or harnesses, or things being done at a unit test level, every developer knows they don't like this news, but they know that every single test that they build at a unit test level should have automation behind it. So it's just important for us to make sure we automate those. But when it comes to the other tests, the regression test or the user testing, those kind of things, sometimes those can be automated. Other times it doesn't make sense. So I think for those, we need to figure out, based on a product or service we're building, does it make sense to automate? Does it make sense to do that type of testing? And I think the thing here, especially with COVID, this is important. It's a risk tolerance analysis. So we need to ask ourselves, is this software that's going to operate a ventilator? If it's software that's going to cause someone, life or death, you probably don't want to, test it while it's in progress. Case in point, just a few minutes ago, right? You don't want to test while something's in progress. You don't want to constantly, you probably should automate so you can verify regularly, if it's something that's going to be a life or death situation, versus something that, I wouldn't want to just do a one-time test on a ventilator and say, yep, it works, and then never test it again for the life cycle until it's all the way built and released. Companies can save money by doing persistent testing that falls into the automation category. But the truth is, some organizations say it's too expensive to automate. It's too expensive to write all the tests to have them automated. And my question is it more expensive to have someone manually execute that test every single sprint? Or is it more expensive for you to automate the test and have it available to run every single sprint? And what I can tell you is over time, you're going to find that, upfront, test automation has a cost associated with it. But over time, test automation quickly pays for itself. In fact, one of the 5 key takeaways that I give in every course that I teach, so one of the 5 key takeaways is always, at a level 1, I should clarify that. The 5 key takeaways, one of them is always, Agile without test automation is dead. So all you testers on a call can applaud. There, I said it. You must have test automation in place, or else what's going to happen is your team's just going to continue to build features, and they're just going to keep building features, and you're not going to have time to do the right levels of testing on those features. So I think it's just so incredibly important for us to understand that, yes, we do have a set of features here, and which percentage needs to be automated? What percentage can we live with? What level of risk tolerance is acceptable? We need to make sure we have a good understanding of what we're trying to produce, what our product or service is, and where our risk tolerance lies, so that we can determine what percentage needs to be automated. Now, back to the original topic that I discussed earlier, this doesn't mean go out and hire a whole bunch of additional testers, right? In fact, I want to teach developers how to write code that would help them automate tests. So that way, if it's something that needs to be automated, they can enter it into a system and have those things automated. There are lots of tools out there that you can use that'll help you do this. But I want to get to the point where we have people who I call murky people, or T-shaped individuals. I want them to know a lot about development and still know how to test things, or a lot about testing, but still know how to write some code. And I think that over time, those individuals are going to provide you with the greatest value, because at times when you need test automation and things along those lines, those are the people who can step up and get those things done. Those are the people who can really step in and do those things. Yeah, somebody in the chat just mentioned, another case here, a use case of this is that the Iowa caucus, right, back in January. It just makes sense. If you're looking at that, that's a great example where, testing would have played a huge difference, right? Instead of waiting, just interesting that these things are all real world applicable today, and even more so, right here, case in point. So the next topic is the lack of a coding standard or testing standard. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a testing or coding standard is, this is sort of like a playbook. So if you're familiar with like a marketing style guide where they say you'll only use these fonts, or you only use these colors, or you only put these things together, or you only want things to appear a certain way, this is very similar. It's a syntax definition of how code is written, or what type of things we want to put in there. This goes back. This is a throwback for all you old school coders. You're welcome. So he's got the sheriff in town there with his deputy. He said, about time here we run that semicolon out of this here town. Because if you wrote code a long time ago, semicolons are a bad thing. But anyway, I digress. That brought me back. But with that being said, it's important for us to have some type of standard. Does this mean that we have extensive documentation behind our code, like code documented? It doesn't mean that you have to have extensive documentation, but it means that if I jumped in and looked at someone else's code, then I would know where I am, that I would know where I stand, where I am, what this says, what it's supposed to be doing, and that I can make clear, sensible decisions regarding that. Right, that I have my head around what's going on, and I have my head around where that code has been, and I understand the journey, and also that I understand where it might cross platforms or be used somewhere else, right? Because sometimes you have to have a way to translate, if you will. You have to have a way to understand that this isn't just, making changes here isn't just going to impact this, it's going to impact other things as well. And I think that that's the big purpose behind this coding standard. A testing standard is much the same. When you're writing test cases or test harnesses, you want to make sure that you have, some kind of clear message across everyone, so that everyone can see things. So you could see things in a way that makes sense, right? And you understand that everyone's doing things the same way. It gives you more of a uniform look and appeal to what you're trying to do. Someone asked, how can I translate this principle to a non-software team? And I think that instead of having a lack of coding standard, you could have a lack of a product standard. And I want to touch on that for a second. I think sometimes when we go to build a product or service, we don't have a really clear vision and strategy. Everyone doesn't understand why they're there to do what they do. I kind of hinted at this earlier in the presentation when I said that I was in an organization and I was in the elevator and I was with a young lady and we were going up to the 8th floor. And I remember, because it was storming down rain, she was really wet. I took off my jacket and gave it to her. I never got that jacket back, but I said, well, what floor? And she said 8. I said, oh, I'm going to 8 too. I said, what's your name? She said, I'm Susie. I said, pleasure to meet you, Susie. I'm Lee. I said, what do you do? She said, I'm just a developer. I said, what just a product do you work on? And she told me. And I said, why do you do that? And she says, who are you? I said, well, we already covered that. I'm Lee, you're Susie. It was a slow elevator. I said, I'm Lee, you're Susie. I said, why do you work on that product? And her answer was, that's what I get paid to do. And I think that if you apply this to a product standard, no one should ever have the answer because it's what I get paid to do. People come to work every day and they have a clear understanding of what they're trying to build, how they're trying to build it, why it needs to be built. And they really get their head around it and say, this makes sense, right? So everyone can be on the same page and understand why our product or service is being built. And many people might say, oh, that's a project charter, or oh, that's a product charter. And while there's no quote unquote existing document called a product charter in the Agile lifecycle, there's no, or an Agile framework, there's no reason why you couldn't have a simple one-page, we call it an Agile press release that gives you that basic information. And it translates that, there should be some standard that we rally around to understand who our target customer is, what problem we're trying to solve, and those type of things. And that's how I would apply it in a non-software way. But in a software world, this is literally saying, when I write code, I write it a certain way. When I write certain things, it's all going to appear the same. It's going to look the same. When I write a class, it's going to look a certain way. And it's going to be a great way for you to just really jump in and say, this makes sense, right? So it gives you the ability to see that and to have a norm. So that way, if somebody does leave, they're not taking all the keys to the kingdom with them. If somebody on a call wins the lottery, I hope it's one of you, that you need to make sure that you can understand this and that you can dig in and really say, that's what they were trying to do. Or, oh, this touches this, we better be careful. So there's lots of good stuff for this. So I have a couple of questions rolling in right here on this that I want to answer. Let's see. So, okay, it wasn't a question, it was just comment. Good. So there is a question. Good. Can lack of coding standard also be lack of a run book? Sure, absolutely. That's another good way to look at it. But I love the way that someone worded this. They said, this standard should make things more maintainable between engineers and between testers. Absolutely. It just makes towards a clear standard that everyone can see. So that's a great point. So thanks for bringing this up. That's awesome. I love when you guys integrate with me this way. So if you have integration, I've got it open, I can see it, feel free to put it there. And yeah. So once again, brilliant advice here. Someone put, quote, it removes developer bottlenecks. And it really does, because then if I can see it and I know what's going on, it just makes sense, right? Okay. So that's our coding standard. Interesting. So then the last topic, then we're going to open up for Q&A. We're running right on time today. That's brilliant. So the last topic is refactoring, or lack of refactoring, a lack of peer review, and I call it Felipe. This is kind of fun. So the guy walks in. I mean, you all know this guy. This is the guy who drives the H1 Hummer and comes to work every day at 10:30 a.m. and he parks it sideways across all the handicap and pregnancy parking places in a parking lot. He comes in and he's got on his button down Hawaiian shirt, and he's got on his little cargo shorts, and he's got his satchel around him carrying his laptop. And, everyone in the building goes, oh, good, His Highness has arrived. And, he comes in, takes off his sunglasses, goes into his corner office where he knocked out subsequent walls because the corner office was too small to fit his ego. And he climbs up on top of his chair behind his 15 monitors like the Starship Enterprise and turns on his computer, and you hear, letting the audible sound, letting everyone in the building know that this guy's here. Yeah, that guy. And I think that it's just, it's interesting, right? There's so much here that, yes, I make fun of this guy. It's terrible, but he seems to be the person who knows the most about certain things and a person who knows the least about everything else. He tends to be the person who has that laser focus on one particular portion of the code or one area of a product or how something works. And if anybody else even breathes on it, it just breaks. Someone said this sounds oddly specific. It sounds like he might be a real guy. His name's not Felipe, but yes, I'm basing this on a real guy. But the truth is, he just, every time he comes in, if people come to him and say, hey, can you help me with this? I've got an issue. Or, hey, can you take a look at this? His answer is always the same. He's like, I would love to help you with that. But there are mines that need to be swept. There is fruit that needs to be ninja'd. There is worlds that need to be warcrafted, right? I mean, this guy's got anything else on his mind than doing actual work. But if anybody else breathes on anything that he built, it falls apart, it explodes. And, this guy is very valuable to the organization. This is the guy that leadership sees as that person that's going to save the day if there's ever a problem. This is the person that everyone turns to when they have a question. It's amazing how much respect this guy gets when that's the last thing that he deserves, right? Which is so crazy to me. This is the guy who just, he needs to disseminate that information and come down from his ivory tower and give everybody the information that they need so we can all be successful. But he refuses to do it. I love what Ken said about this. I remember when I was with Ken back in 2005, he said that no set of code should ever leave the building without two sets of eyes looking over it. And I agree with that. There should never be any part where we're working on just a single point of failure, a single point of success. We need to make sure that we have at least a couple of people who know. Oftentimes when I get these really, really smart people, I will pull those folks in a room and say, hey, you all are, so smart, so bright, what can we learn from each of you? Can you each absorb 20% of this so that we don't have this one Felipe guy, who's the only person in the company that knows how to do something? Because heaven forbid, if he won the lottery or if he asked for another raise and they finally decided to fire him, he'd have to disseminate all that information somehow, or we'd have a whole bunch of angry, disgruntled workers like we do here who have to figure out what he did. And, it just becomes troublesome, right? The funniest part about this whole picture is the time on the clock says 10:30. Oh, good, His Highness has arrived. It's that kind of thing, right? He's in at 10:30, out by 3. It's that person. And, unfortunately, we've caused him to be that way. So I think what I'm trying to say here is focus on pair programming, focus on peer reviews, focus on mob programming, focus on those things that are going to help you really accelerate your agility as a business. And really, take those exciting things to the forefront and move forward. So I know a lot of people are saying they had to jump off the call at 1. This was designed to be a 90-minute webinar. But I want to close it out and give you a chance to do some Q&A because I know I've seen some really valuable questions coming through. So I want to end with this. So organize a technical debt sprint. We talked about this a little bit. I want to make sure that this is probably the highlight of the entire session. The steps to do this: number 1, you identify the top 10 outstanding items that you want to address. And they could be bugs or defects. They could be, something bigger that you need to address internally. Whatever it is, you just pick the top 10 items you want to address and dedicate 1 sprint per quarter to address the most pressing issues until you get your debt under control. Once you get the debt under control, then you could say it's 1 sprint every 6 months or 1 sprint a year. But you need to dedicate 1 solid 2-week sprint to addressing the debt. 3, you have to make sure you consider up front and make sure everyone's aware with clear vision, debt will not be addressed, or that, that all debt won't be addressed, that will only, some items will just be archived. And if they come back, they come back. We need to be transparent and saying, hey, this is what we're going to cover. This is what we're not going to cover. These are the things we're going to do. And these are the things we're going to tack on to later. Apple does this really well. And this is where I got booted last time. Maybe it was someone from Microsoft listening in, but Apple does this incredibly well. They say, you know what, let's bottle that up. And when we make our new iOS, and when we make our new OS, we'll go ahead and incorporate things to fix those things. But it doesn't make sense to do it now because it's not really having a huge risk impact on the customers. So very cool the way that they take that into consideration. 4 is explore creative ways to not allow debt to interrupt current ongoing sprints. So we have a concept that we teach, and this might be a topic for another day, called Team John, where people rotate off and they have an opportunity to do things that are innovative and creative, but they also can address some of these interruptions so that they don't interrupt the core team. So the core team can continue facilitating and doing the work in the ongoing sprint. A real powerful tool, but there's lots of other things that you can do as well. But that's just one example of something that we promote within AgileDad that helps organizations really get their head around this. 5, find ways to convey to leadership the importance of getting this done and be persistent in getting debt on the table. I think sometimes when you tell organizations or leadership that you have debt, a lot of times they don't want to believe that debt's there, or they don't want to believe that it's as much as it really is. So a lot of times you'll see them try to find ways to casually brush off the debt, or say, let's take one person and 1 person per sprint and give 10% of their time to, that's the same as having like a $40,000 credit card bill and paying like the minimum monthly payment each month. You'll never pay off the debt, right? It's just, some people just don't want to say, hey, we have debt, we have a problem, and it's something that we need to address. So I think these 5 steps will help you create and organize something called a tech debt sprint. And once you get that sprint in play, it's easy. I see a bunch of people chiming in saying, yeah, it's a good idea to schedule these around the holidays when other priorities aren't planned as much. That's a great idea. Someone else said, yeah, we do one of these a quarter and we have great success. Someone else said, we took your classes, thank you, and we implemented this and it worked very well. We had someone say, we originally started doing this once per quarter, and after taking your coaching sessions, we're now cut back to twice a year, and pretty soon we'll be going back to once a year. Outstanding. This is what we're trying to do. We want to take this debt and gain control of it. We don't want to let it rule our decisions and rule who we are and where we're going, right? We want to make sure that we understand what the debt is. We want to make sure we understand how to tackle it, and that we create that top 10 list or the top 20 list. So that way we have 10 in flight and another 10 planned for next, when appropriate, right? But the key to this whole thing is that all 7 of these tie together, in case you didn't notice. They all tie together, right? If you're not refactoring and not doing peer reviews, you're going to have a really poor coding standard, and you're not going to have time to write automated tests, and you're going to have a whole bunch of outdated defects and bugs that no one wants to touch, and the backlog's going to become polluted. It's funny how it all ties together, right? It's one of these things where if you don't do one, the domino effect is incredible. It rolls into the snowball, and it's something that you really struggle tackling. So good stuff, good information. And thank you to all of you who actively help participate in the comments and whatnot. That's awesome. So on behalf of my family, as usual, I want to leave you with a thought. And that way, if anybody needs to drop off the call right away, they can. But then I'm going to open up the floor for questions, just like we did yesterday. So like I said yesterday, Bob Barker always says, have your pet spayed or neutered. I think that's lame, not because he wants you to have your pet spayed and neutered, but because he says the same message every day. So I want to leverage and leave you with a different message today than I did yesterday. So let's give you that message, and then we'll jump to your questions. So the message for today is that sometimes we feel trapped. We feel trapped, whether it's we're trapped inside our homes and we're unable to go out, or we're being oppressed because we're unable to make decisions for ourselves, and we're having legislators and other folks saying, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that, or you can't do this, or you need to wear a mask, or whatever the case may be. But sometimes the things in our life that restrict us the most are the things in our life that empower us the most. And I think that sometimes we let our emotions get in the way of understanding that when someone's trying to help us do something that's in our best interest, we let our mind wander because we're so used to being taken advantage of. And I think it's just one of these things where we need to reset ourselves and say, am I doing what's best for myself and for people closest to me? or does this make sense? Or how can I apply this? Or what positive thing are they trying to get out of this? Or what positive message is supposed to be happening? And I think that if you live your life in such a way that you don't let people rule how you feel, and this is where it gets interesting. I used to hear this all the time with my kids. This person made me feel this way, or this thing made me. Nobody made you feel that way. You chose to feel that way. And I think that if you look at this and look at the world around us, especially as we start to revert back, the good news is I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm pretty confident that it's not a train coming from the other direction to hit us. I'm pretty confident that it's an escape, right? And I think that if we look at that light at the end of the tunnel and say, there are brighter days ahead, what can we do to be prepared? How do we look at this and say, what positive can I get from this? And whether that positive is, man, I got to spend a whole lot more time with my family or with my friends or with my colleagues that live near me, or whether it's I got to spend a lot of time with my fur babies. If you're single and that's the case, so be it. Whatever it is that makes you happy, you need to seek out those things, especially now, because it won't be long before things are like they were before. So good stuff, right? I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here, and I've got questions rolling in, so I want to make sure I start addressing these. This has been amazing. So for those of you who've joined me, thank you. The comic book is available at agiledad.com/downloads under comic book section, just like it was before. The recordings of these are going to be published as well. The first one from the podcast yesterday, from the webinar yesterday, is available already on YouTube. So if you go to the AgileDad YouTube channel, it's there. So it's good stuff. So thank you for being here, and thanks for participating. You were awesome. So I'll reserve this last 15 minutes or so for questions, as I always do. So let's see. So let's pull up these questions real quick. I appreciate it. It's going to take me a second because I'm rewinding to answer some of the oldest questions first. Let's see. How can you convince a colleague that thinks he or she is the man on the hill, but somehow causing some of the technical debt problems? This is common. Oh my goodness. That person at the top of the hill is always the one who, the person who's doing the offense is often the one who, we need to convince. And usually what I end up doing is I approach that individual and say, I don't want you to have to work on all this archaic stuff. I would rather you focus your attention on some of the new innovative things. And I think that you haven't been given a fair opportunity to do that. Why don't we take some of this old stuff off your plate and kind of disseminate it to 2 or 3 people so that we can get you working on some of the cutting edge innovative stuff. And oftentimes that's a good way to get them to engage and to come back. Do you have any recommended reading for these? Yeah, there's tons of recommended reading about debt. The Imagineering Workout is a great one. It's by the Disney Imagineers, and it teaches you about how to approach things through a different light. And one of our attendees put one in the chat that talks about the subtle art of not giving a, well, I'm not going to read that part, but it's apparently a good book. I haven't read that one, but I have heard good things about it. So, I think sometimes not caring is the best advice you can give, because when you don't care, it shows that you do care. I don't care about all the things that are going on around us. I want to laser focus and figure out what we can do today, right? So it's brilliant stuff, good stuff. Somebody asked, will this be available to view at a later date? Yes, it's on YouTube Live, and we are recording, so that'll be a brilliant thing. Let's see. Somebody else asked, for Agile projects, is manual testing only not an option? And it's not that manual testing is not an option. What I'm trying to say is you need to really be careful to reduce the amount of manual testing you can do, because it's time consuming. You want to focus on automation. And if you can only do manual testing because of the type of product or service you're doing, you need to do test optimization and figure out whether it's test once or test a bunch. And then you can optimize those tests. But it doesn't mean manual testing is bad. I want to make sure I emphasize that, because manual testing is a way to get things done. It's just, if you can automate those tests, it usually ends up becoming a lot better. Let's see, we have another one here. For a Scrumban team, which is more Kanbanish than Scrummish, I'm thinking we could affect the tech debt sprint by convincing the PO to prioritize tech debt work for a period of time. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Yeah, so that's a perfect example. So if you're doing Scrumban, or if you're doing Kanban, where you're doing things in a first in, first out FIFO matter, maybe you're not organizing things specifically into sprints. What you can do is you could set a cycle time and say, for the next 5 days, for the next whatever, right, that we're only going to address debt related items. And we'll let those other things queue up, and then we'll just build off of that queue after. But yeah, in a Scrumban environment, there's still a way to do this and still a way to tackle debt, because the truth is, debt still exists on those teams. And I think sometimes people use the excuse, but we're doing Kanban or we're doing Scrumban. They use that as an excuse to try to get out of doing the debt instead of taking care of the things that need to be taken care of. We have another question or comment. They say it's not about or it is all about what you're selecting, what you care about and what you decide to focus on. And that's the key to being successful in doing this. I couldn't agree more. That sounds sage advice from one of my dear friends. So thank you for that. But it's great advice. If you can dedicate your focus to the things you care about the most, it's going to make things a lot easier. Looks like we have a couple more questions. Somebody asked, is there another reference? This was great material. Is there another reference I can use? Yes. So there are lots of good references about this topic, technical debt. So I have a SlideShare presentation that you can download as well from the other conference that I did that has a little more meat around the technical debt piece. There's also the comic book that you can download. And there's the podcast from today that I'm planning on uploading exactly after this call that talks a little bit about this. So for those of you who don't know, we have a podcast called The Daily Stand-Up. It's usually 10 minutes. It's anywhere from 9 to 15 minutes a day. And it talks about one Agile topic a day. And it's just a real good way if you have a team that needs to have something to listen to, or if you're looking for something good to queue up and you want to keep it Agile related, but keep it lighthearted and a little bit funny. Daily stand-up, meaning stand-up comedian, not stand-up meeting. But it gives you an opportunity to really explore some of these topics a little deeper. So yeah, that's a good reference as well. Somebody asked me if I'm going to do an upcoming webinar that covers more about the Team John concept. That's a good idea. So in addition to, so I'll write that down. So in addition to the one that we already have slotted for the month of June, where we're going to talk about estimation, because that was one that was requested, we'll queue a second one up to talk about Team John specifically and what that means and what it is to you. Looks like we have one more. So I am in a position where, okay, so this individual is just asking, basically, they say, hey, I'm in a position where I have a training budget, but we really want to bring someone on site. Do you have any idea when you're going to start performing on-site classes or on-site coaching again? With COVID, it's so questionable. We don't know. Maybe it'll be June timeframe. I know that I have a class scheduled for Tampa in early June. And I know that I had some requests to go out to Puerto Rico for some classes. So I know that we're hoping to do those in person because it's a lot harder to do that, especially with a bilingual translation. We want to make sure that we can do those in person if possible. So yeah, so there's some additional things there. So someone asked, could you repeat the name of the Imagineering book that you mentioned earlier? Yeah, so it's called the Imagineering Workout. Let's see. I'm gonna hold you for 1 second because I think I actually have a copy of it right over here. It's, it might be in my office in Utah. I'm looking now and I don't see it on my shelf. I apologize. If I had a copy, I was going to flash it on a screen. It's called the Imagineering Workout. And it's a really powerful book. And you know what? I do have a copy. Okay, so let's see if I can get it to go with this virtual background. Here we go. The Imagineering, you know what? I'm going to make this a lot easier. I want you to be able to see this. So I'll turn off my virtual background. The Imagineering Workout. So this was by the Disney Imagineers. So this is a copy of the book. And this is proof in the pudding right here for all of you who've taken my class before that I actually do read the books that I put on my book list. I have them all and I read them. This is just an excellent book. I do a lot of work with the Walt Disney Company and I have mad respect for them. So yeah, so if you have a chance to grab that book, it's an awesome book. It's the best way, and I love the quote on the back by Walt. It says, the best way to get started is to stop talking about what you're going to do and doing, right? So, begin doing. Don't just talk about it, right? Do the things you say you're going to do. Okay, so it looks like that might be a summary of all the questions. I don't see anything else popping in. So once again, I appreciate your time. I realize time's the most valuable thing you have. Thank you for spending that time with me. Stay well, stay healthy. If there's anything else I can help you with, somebody mentioned they'd like to see a webinar as a Scrum Master about how to help product owners with backlog refinement. That might also be a great idea. So go ahead and make sure you submit that to me. Oh, many people are asking about PDUs. If you want to get a PDU instruction list, just email Lee at AgileDad or learn more at AgileDad and put PDUs in step by step how to get those PDUs. So thanks a bunch. You all were amazing. If you have anything else for me, make sure you let me know. I couldn't have done it without you. And we'll see you tomorrow for another exciting webinar. We're going to talk about the 9 ways to empower and motivate highly functioning teams. So thanks a bunch. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.